Hello, today I'm going to be talking you through how you can deploy your sites out to Vercel using GitHub Actions. My name is Rob Earlam and I'm a part of the developer advocacy group here at Sitecore, and I've been with Sitecore for about 6 years now, but I've been using their products for a long time before that. I've got a series of different social channels that you can see on screen here, so please get in touch after this if you've got any questions. As I said though, today I want to talk a bit about Vercel and GitHub Actions, and specifically how you can use those two different technologies together to build out your front-end CI framework. So let's start off by looking at these two different products first. First off, I'm going to take a look at Vercel. And you may have seen that Sitecore recently announced a partnership with them, and you might be wondering what it is they actually do. Well, they've been around for a few years now, and they've been making some big waves in the front-end Jamstack community. Vercel describe themselves as a platform for front-end frameworks and static sites, and they're built to integrate with headless content, commerce, and database backends. Basically, they're a hosting provider for front-end sites with a few extra bells and whistles on. What they're really good at though is making simple deployment scenarios super easy to configure. They come also with some great built-in features, things like automatic preview and production environments, automatic provisioning of HTTPS certificates, and a really nice out-of-the-box GitHub integration for simple deployment scenarios. And that's what I want to look at first, is this out-of-the-box GitHub integration, which for like a lot of simple scenarios is going to be really good. And it's super easy to set up. It's literally just a few clicks and it'll be up and running. And you get quite a lot out of the box. It works on a pull model, so after you've configured it, Vercel will monitor your GitHub repository, and anytime there's a change, it will push out a new version of your site. As I said, you automatically get things like preview and production environments provisioned for you, and you get HTTPS certificates provided out of the box. Again, all provisioned automatically. You don't have to do a thing to get those working. And it's really good for simple scenarios. Like, I use this integration for my personal site, and it has been a completely smooth process the entire time. I really recommend it. So let's take a look at it in action. Okay, so I've loaded up Visual Studio Code here. What we're going to do is we're going to create a basic kind of hello world Next.js app. And that's the command I just entered into the terminal here. This is going to leverage the create next app functionality in NPM. And it's going to basically go away and build me a very, very basic Next.js application. We can see it's created the Vercel example folder here. And if we have a look in there, we can see we've got our package.json with all our dependencies that are created. And now it's just going through and installing all of the different node modules and everything else that's required in there. You can obviously see there's heaps of things in there as usual. So our plan with this basically is we're going to set up this Next.js app locally. We'll give it a quick test in the browser to make sure it runs. After that, we're going to go and take it and deploy it into a GitHub repository. Once it's in there, we can then use the default Vercel integration we just talked about, and we can basically link those two together and get changes to this application basically automatically flowing out to Vercel anytime they're made. So we can see the installation process is following through here. We're getting a few more files appearing. After it's gone and created all the dependencies, what it'll do, it'll go and create all the actual page items that are required for this very, very simple Next.js application. So it's finished now. If we look in the pages folder, here you can see we have our index.js, and this is basically our home page, our initial landing page for our Next.js application. So if I just move into the Vercel app sample folder, and then we'll run npm run dev, and that'll basically run the application in development mode locally on my machine. And it should come up and say, yep, so it started the web server and port 3000. So if we hop over to my browser, we should be able to go to localhost 3000. And here's your Hello World app. When you do a basic Next.js installation, this is the initial app you're going to get. This is statically generated. This is the basic Next.js app you can do. So that's pretty good. I think the next plan is to put this over into GitHub so we can start linking it to Vercel. So if I hop over to GitHub here, I'm basically going to create a new repository, and we'll just call this Vercel Next.js example. That sounds good. And I don't need to populate anything else yet. So this will go and create the repository for me. Because we already have the code locally, we don't want to clone this repository over the top. We just want to add this repository as a remote for the existing code base. Luckily, GitHub gives you that code straight off the bat, which is the third example here, pushing an existing repository from the command line. So we can just copy those commands, head back to VS Code again, and we'll terminate the local server, and we'll paste those commands in. Just have to hit enter on the last one, and the last one will push this code base up into the repository we just created. Hop back to the browser, and there we go. We've got our code base in there. That's pretty easy. Okay, I think next up is going to be linking this over with Vercel. So if I go start a new tab here, and I'll just go into my Vercel account. Okay, so I've just loaded up Vercel. And here you can see I already have one project live, which is my personal site, but we're going to create a new project now. This is where we tie it to the Git repository we just made. I'm going to hit the import button, and I'm not going to change any of these default settings. This is basically going to go through and just assign all of the default actions which work for most scenarios really. This is a super basic hello world site, so we don't need to add any custom build variables or anything like that in here. What's going to happen now is Vercel is going to go away. It'll clone the repository we just created. From there, it'll install all the npm packages, much the same as how we saw locally. And that's how this is going to be run inside of Vercel. What that means is it's going to go and calculate how many pages it needs to generate. And we can see that here. It says it needs to generate 3 pages. As I said, super simple site. And it's finished generating those. After that, it goes down and it basically builds a cache of everything needed to run the site. And it's going to go and deploy that and push it out to the CDN that's built into Vercel. Don't forget that when you are running with statically generated sites, this one's going to be super fast to deploy because it's only 3 pages. But once your sites get bigger than that, tens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of pages, the build time can be a little bit of a bottleneck. Luckily, you can get around that using some clever features like incremental static site regeneration when you're using Next.js on Vercel. Definitely something to look into for sure. So it's going to finish the build process here, and after that, we should be assigned a subdomain off the main vercel.com domain where we'll be able to access our new site. And there we go. We can see we've got the success message. It says congratulations. We can go to the dashboard and view our live deployed site. And you can see it's deployed a subdomain for this site off the vercel.app main domain. We can click on there, and here we can see our main app has been deployed. As I mentioned before, you get full HTTPS certificate. We can see this is a trusted certificate. It's a valid cert that's been issued, and we didn't have to do any configuration for that. That's all provided for us. So if we hop back to the dashboard, we can go and view the deployments tab. And we can see this is the production deployment. That's just what's been performed there. But as I mentioned, Vercel comes with the concept of preview builds built in as well. And what that means is any commit that happens on a non-main branch will then issue basically a build of a preview domain for you to hit, a preview build, a preview environment. So let's give that a go, see what happens. I'm going to hop back to VS Code again. And what we'll do is we'll create a new branch and we'll just call it test preview. Okay, from here, we're just going to make some really obvious changes. We don't want it inside the anchor. Let's make it just outside. Preview site. So we'll update the H1. That should do. That should be pretty straightforward. So if we check out Git status, we can see, yeah, our main index page has been modified. So let's add that. And then we will commit the change. H1, and then we'll push it up to GitHub. The branch doesn't exist in GitHub yet, so it tells us we need to set our upstream branch. Luckily, it gives us the command we need to run to be able to execute that. This is now going to create that test preview branch in our GitHub repository and push up the change we just made. So if we first of all go over to GitHub, we can take a look at it there. If we go and look here, we can see straight away, test preview has recent pushes less than a minute ago. We can see I have my test preview branch listed here. If I now go over to my next app example in here, the deployments tab we looked at before has already updated. We can see it's already building our updated H1 change from the test preview branch. And we can see it's a preview deployment, it's not a production deployment. And that's finished already, like 22 seconds. That's super fast. If you load up that deployment itself, you can see it's been given its own private subdomain. So we can load this one up, and this is our preview build. You can see it's got the change we made to the H1 tag, but I think I've still got my normal page open. Yeah, this is my production build here, no change. We can refresh that side and see that it's still the same. Or we can go back to our preview site, and there again, you can see the preview changes there, not made it to main yet. And you can see I had to do no configuration for that. That was all handled for me right out of the box. The last thing I wanted to highlight was the display of environments in the GitHub repository. When we first created this, there was no link through to Vercel, so you can see there's no environment section on the right. Now that link's been created, I'm just going to refresh this page, and we can see we now have our environments displayed. So anyone can now come along, they can see the environments that are there, they can see how the code's been deployed to which environment, which is a really nice integration. Again, all provided straight out of the box, nothing I had to configure to make that work. Okay, so before we start to look at the GitHub Actions piece, I just really want to talk about the project we were working on, where this all came about. And that's the Sitecore Developer Portal, which we just released recently. For those who haven't seen it already, you should definitely go and check it out. It's live today at developers.sitecore.com, and we built it out using Next.js. It's all been developed open source, so you can go to the GitHub repository on screen now and take a look at the source code today. You can see exactly how we've built it, how we've integrated with any third parties we have, and we're actively taking PRs if you want to contribute as well. We started out originally using the default Vercel GitHub integration we just looked at. But we quickly developed a list of requirements for the future, which made us realize we were going to outgrow it. Features like being able to sync content out to a CMS, for example. So this led us to look for a solution that was a better fit for our project. This is where GitHub Actions came in. The requirement for us to be able to customize our deployments out to Vercel, add in steps we needed, any point through the deployment flow we wanted, kind of meant we'd move past the default integration we looked at before. I'd seen some presentations from Microsoft on GitHub Actions, so this seemed like a good project to give them a try out, see whether they'd be a good fit. For any of you who haven't worked with GitHub Actions before, basically they allow you to define a CI pipeline, and you do that through a YAML definition file. The nice thing about GitHub Actions is you can start to leverage third-party extensions to interact with a whole heap of different systems, languages, and frameworks. On top of that, you can also build your own. So if you're working with a framework or language and you think other people can benefit from what you've built, you can issue it as a third-party plugin, and other people can then leverage it in their CI pipelines. So that finally brings us to how we brought these two pieces of technology together. How did we actually set up our deployment pipeline to match the requirements? Well, let's take a look at those requirements first. We wanted to maintain both the preview and production environment functionality we saw earlier on. We wanted to maintain the display of those environments on our repository page so that anyone coming to view the repository could see the current state of our production and preview environments. We wanted to be able to switch secrets out per environment. So if you had a different API key, for example, for a third-party system you're interacting with, you'd want to be able to change that in the CI pipeline depending on whether you're doing a preview or production build. Finally, and probably most importantly for us, we wanted this to be a base framework. We wanted to be able to extend it in the future to add any custom steps we wanted to integrate with any third-party systems as required. We wanted the CI pipeline to be able to grow in complexity as the feature set of the developer portal grew with it. So let's take a look at how we achieved that. Okay, so I've loaded up VS Code once more. Well, this time I've opened up the developer portal repository instead. This is the one we just had the link to on screen before. If you check it out, you'll see exactly what we have here. Now, when working with GitHub Actions, the YAML definitions are all stored in a specific location. That is in the .github folder, in the workflows folder. And you can see here we have our deployment definition. I'll move the files out of the way. And this is the YAML definition I mentioned earlier. This is the complete definition of our CI pipeline for the developer portal. I just want to step through and show how we've built it out and where we're basically allowing the possibility for extension in the future. You can see this gets executed for every single either push into the repository or any time there's a pull request that gets executed. What happens with then, we end up with a series of jobs. The first job we run is the build job. The purpose behind this job is basically to make sure the code that's checked in still actually builds. We want the CI server to perform that task before it even contacts and goes to speak to the deployment and Vercel itself. We just want to make sure the code's correct. So what we do is we specify this step to run on an Ubuntu machine. We then check out the code, and we're then going to install Node.js version 14. Finally, we run an npm install to load all the node dependencies. Then we run the npm build command. And the npm build command with Next.js actually does a static generation. It's going to go through all the pages and make sure all of them will build. This would also probably be the time you'd want to run any unit tests, should you have any of those as well. Once we've done that, we're then confident and happy that we want to contact Vercel. We want to push this build out either to production, or we want to push it out to preview, depending on what kind of build it is and where it's coming from. So that means we start the deploy job. And if we look at this first, the first thing we have is this huge line here. And what this is basically saying is that because this action itself is going to run whenever there's a PR that's opened, we don't want PRs themselves to kick off a preview build. We're happy for them just to be checked they do build, that the source code's correct. And after that, the PR will be reviewed and then a preview deployment will happen. To ensure that's the case, we have this long line here. Basically, we're just saying that we need to make sure that the request is coming from the Sitecore repository itself, not from a fork of the repository. Once that's been validated, then we go through and actually do our deployment. And it's pretty simple. There's only 3 steps to it. The first step we do is called the start deployment step. And this key piece here is around ensuring we still have the environments displayed against our GitHub repository. What this does here is this goes and creates a deployment against an environment that you specify. And we have this environment switch here. So we basically say we're either switching to do a production or a preview deployment, and it all depends on whether we're running against the main branch or not. If we're running against the main branch, it'll be a production deployment. If we're not running against the main branch, it'll be a preview deployment. After that, we run a checkout. Then we actually do our Vercel push. Here we're using, again, a third-party GitHub action. And as I said, these are really simple to go and pull in from the marketplace. We pass in the tokens required to be able to authenticate with Vercel. We set the arguments up. So again, we're checking whether it is a main branch we're working with. And if it is, we patch the -- prod flag. This uses the Vercel CLI under the hood. That's how you differentiate between a production and a preview build. Once that's happened, the Vercel point's completed. This few lines of code here is all you need to push out a build to Vercel. The final piece we have though is to close off the deployment. And again, this is all hinged on updating the notification status on the homepage of the repo. And again, much similar to the step before, here we're basically just finishing off the deployment idea we started earlier. And that is it. It was really, really simple to put together a set of steps which replicated the same functionality we had. But we've already started to add some belt and braces checks. Having the build beforehand allows us to basically ensure the source code is correct before we even go out to Vercel. That means that we don't end up with any failures on the Vercel side. Once the code gets to there, we know it'll build. And you can see how after here, it'd be easy to extend it. If we get to the point where we add a CMS on after this and we need to do some content syncing, maybe from serialized items, you could just add another serialization step after the deploy step here. And that could then maybe use the Sitecore CLI to contact your CMS instance and perform the serialization. It's going to be really easy for us to build out this to basically meet any future scenario we need. So we've seen the code. Let's take a look at it in action. Okay, so here we have the developer portal repository. If you look on the right, you can see we have our environments listed, just as we do when we're working with the default integration. Because we're working with GitHub Actions though, we can now go through to the Actions tab here. And this is where all the CI process happens. And we can look through and see all of the previous builds that have happened. We can see we have builds going out very regularly whenever things happen. You can also see the branch that it happened on. So this is on a branch here that would have created a preview deployment. Here we can see one for main, so that would have created a production deployment. So I really like how everything's kind of tied together inside the one location now. I don't have to go over to my CI server to be able to see the state of the different builds I have there. But if you want to view things in Vercel, if you're working in there already, you can do that too. If I hop over to there now, here's our Vercel account for the production site, for our developer portal. Once more, we can go and see the deployments in here too. And these are the same deployments we have, which are linked through to the GitHub Actions we just looked at. We can see here we have our preview deployments going out from every change to the branches that happen, each one with its own private subdomain being generated for testing. And we can also see the current production build. Notice it's highlighted as current, still showing us what's live today, just as we did with the default build as well. So there you have it. That is how we configured our CI pipeline using GitHub Actions to push out to Vercel. We found the two technologies work really well together for handling complex deployment scenarios. Most of that was because Vercel was really easy to integrate a third-party CI system with. So maybe you don't want to use GitHub Actions. Maybe you want to use Azure DevOps or Octopus Deploy or any of the other CI tooling that's out there today. Well, I'm sure you'd find it just as easy integrating those with Vercel as well. Finally, don't forget to check out the developer portal that's live today at developers.sitecore.com. And check out the source code on the repository URL on screen if you want to see how it was built, and contribute as well if you want. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to follow the Learn Sitecore hashtag for future videos.